The three farmers, Boggis, Bunce and Bean, planned to starve Mr. Fox out. They were camped round the hole, with their guns ready on their laps, and all their farm workers had been ordered to form a tight ring around the bottom of the hill. This made it quite impossible for a fox, or indeed any other animal, to escape from the hill. Down the hole the foxes were beginning to starve. For 3 days and 3 nights this waiting game went on. "How long can a fox go without food or water?" Boggis asked on the 3rd day. "Not much longer now," Bean told him. "He'll make a run for it soon. He'll have to." Bean was right. Down in the tunnel the foxes were slowly but surely starving to death.
"If only we could have just a tiny sip of water," said one of the small foxes. "Oh, Dad, can't you do something? Couldn't we make a dash for it, Dad? We'd have a little bit of a chance, wouldn't we?"
"No chance at all," snapped Mrs. Fox. "I refuse to let you go up there and face those guns. I'd sooner you stay down here and die in peace." Mr. Fox had not spoken for a long time. He had been sitting quite still, his eyes closed, not even hearing what the others were saying. Mrs. Fox knew that he was trying desperately to think of a way out, and now as she looked at him, she saw him stir himself and get slowly to his feet. He looked back at his wife. There was a little spark of excitement dancing in his eyes. "What is it, darling?" said Mrs. Fox quickly. "I've just had a bit of an idea," Mr. Fox said carefully.
"What? Dad, what is it?"
"Come on," said Mrs. Fox. "Tell us quickly." "Well," said Mr. Fox. Then he stopped and sighed and sadly shook his head. He sat down again. "It's no good," he said. "It won't work after all."
"Why not, Dad?"
"Because it means more digging, and we aren't any of us strong enough for that after 3 days and nights without food."
"Yes, we are, Dad!"
cried the small foxes, jumping up and running to their father.
"We could do it! You see if we can't! So could you!"
Mr. Fox looked at the 4 small foxes, and he smiled. "What fine children I have," he thought. "They are starving to death, and they haven't had a drink for 3 days, but they are still undefeated. I must not let them down." "I suppose we could give it a try," he said.
"Let's go, Dad. Tell us what you want us to do."
Slowly Mrs. Fox got to her feet. She was suffering more than any of them from the lack of food and water. She was very weak. "I am so sorry," she said, "but I don't think I'm going to be much help." "You stay right where you are, my darling," said Mr. Fox. "We can handle this by ourselves. This time we must go in a very special direction," said Mr. Fox. So he and his 4 children started to dig once again. For how long they did not know, because there were no days and no nights in the murky tunnel. But at last Mr. Fox gave the order to stop. "I think," he said, "we'd better take a peep upstairs now and see where we are. I know where I want to be." Slowly, wearily, the foxes began to slope the tunnel up. Up and up it went, until suddenly they came to something hard and they couldn't go up any further. Mr. Fox reached up. "It's wood," he whispered. "Wooden planks."
"What's that mean, Dad?"
"It means, unless I am very much mistaken, that we're right underneath somebody's house. Be very quiet now while I take a peek." Mr. Fox began pushing up one of the floorboards. It creaked terribly, but nothing happened, so Mr. Fox pushed up a second board, and then very cautiously he poked his head up through the gap. "I've done it! First time I've done it!" The foxes scrambled up out of the tunnel, and what a fantastic sight it was that now met their eyes. They were in a huge shed, and the whole place was teeming with chickens, chickens by the 1,000. "Boggish Chicken House number 1, cried Mr. Fox. They all ran over to the chicken's drinking trough and lapped up the lovely cool water. Then Mr. Fox chose 3 of the plumpest hens, and with a clever flick of his jaws killed them instantly. "Back to the tunnel," he ordered. "The quicker you move, the quicker you shall have something to eat." They climbed down through the hole in the floor and into the dark tunnel. Mr. Fox reached up and pulled the floorboards back into place so that no one could tell they'd ever been moved. "My son," he said, giving the 3 plump hens to the biggest of his 4 small children, "run back with these to your mother. Tell her to prepare a feast. Tell her the rest of us will be along in a jiffy as soon as we've made a few other little arrangements." "Keep digging," said Mr. Fox. All of a sudden a deep voice said, "Who goes there?" The foxes jumped. They looked up quickly, and they saw, peeking through a small hole in the roof of the tunnel, a long, black, pointed, furry face. "Badger!" cried Mr. Fox.
"Foxy!" cried Badger. "My goodness me, I'm glad I found someone at last. I've been digging around in circles for 3 days and nights, and I haven't the foggiest idea where I am."
Badger made the hole in the ceiling bigger and dropped down beside the foxes. A small badger, his son, dropped down after him.
"Haven't you heard what's happening up on the hill?" Badger said excitedly. "It's chaos. Half the wood has disappeared, and there are men with guns all over the countryside. None of us can get out, even at night. We're all starving to death."
"Who is we?" asked Mr. Fox.
"All us diggers. That's me, and Mole, and Rabbit, and all our wives and children. Even Weasel, who can usually sneak out of the tightest spots, is right now hiding down my hole with Mrs. Weasel and 6 kids. What on earth are we going to do, Foxy? I think we're finished."
Mr. Fox looked at his 3 children, and he smiled. The children smiled back at him, sharing his secret. "My dear old Badger," he said, "this mess you're in is all my fault."
"I know it's your fault," said Badger furiously. "And the farmers are not going to give up till they've got you. Unfortunately, that means us as well. It means everyone on the hill."
Badger sat down and put a paw round his small son.
"We're done for," he said softly. "My poor wife up there is so weak she can't dig another yard."
"Nor can mine," said Mr. Fox. "And yet at this very minute she's preparing for me and my children the most delicious feast of plump, juicy chickens."
"Stop!" cried Badger. "Don't tease me. I can't stand it."
"It's true," cried the small foxes. "That's not teasing. We've got chickens galore."
"And because everything is entirely my fault," said Mr. Fox, "I invite you to share the feast. I invite everyone to share it. It's you and Mole and Rabbit and Weasel and all your wives and children. There'll be plenty to go round, I assure you."
"You mean it?" cried Badger. "You really mean it?"
Mr. Fox pushed his face close to Badger's and whispered darkly, "Do you know where we've just been?"
"Where?"
"Right inside Boggis's chicken house number 1.
"No."
"Yes, but that is nothing to where we're going now. You have come just at the right moment, my dear Badger. You can help us dig, and in the meanwhile your small son can run back to Mrs. Badger and all the others and spread the good news." Mr. Fox turned to the small badger and said, "Tell them they're invited to a fox's feast. Then bring them all down here and follow this tunnel back until you find my home."
"Yes, Mr. Fox,"
said the small badger.
"Right away, sir. Thank you, sir."
And he scrambled quickly back through the hole in the roof and disappeared. They were digging the new tunnel. They dug on in silence. Badger was a great digger, and the tunnel went forward at a terrific pace now that he was lending a paw. Soon they were crouching underneath yet another wooden floor. Mr. Fox grinned slyly, showing sharp white teeth. "If I'm not mistaken, my dear Badger," he said, "we are now underneath the farm which belongs to that nasty little pot-bellied dwarf Bunce. We are, in fact, directly underneath the most interesting part of that farm."
"But how in the world can you know where we are?" asked Badger.
Mr. Fox grinned again. "Look," he said, "I know my way round these farms blindfold. For me it's just as easy below ground as it is above it." He reached high and pushed up one wooden floorboard and then another. He poked his head through the gap. "Yes," he shouted, jumping up into the room above. "I've done it again. I've hit it smack on the nose, right in the bullseye. Come and look." Quickly Badger and the 3 small foxes scrambled up after him. They stopped and stared. They stood and gaped. They were so overwhelmed they couldn't speak, for what they now saw was a kind of fox's dream, a badger's dream, a paradise for hungry animals. Against all the four walls of the great room, stacked in cupboards and piled upon shelves reaching from floor to ceiling, were thousands and thousands of the finest and fattest ducks and geese, plucked and ready for roasting. And up above, dangling from the rafters, there must have been at least 100 smoked hams and 50 sides of bacon. "Just feast your eyes on that," cried Mr. Fox, dancing up and down. "What do you think of it, eh? Pretty good grub." Suddenly, as though springs had been released in their legs, the 3 hungry small foxes and the ravenously hungry badger sprang forward to grab the luscious food. "Stop!" ordered Mr. Fox. "This is my party, so I shall do the choosing." The others fell back, licking their chops. Mr. Fox began prowling around the storehouse, examining the glorious display with an expert eye. A thread of saliva slid down one side of his jaw, then snapped. "We mustn't overdo it," he said. "Mustn't give the game away, mustn't let them know what we've been up to. We must be neat and tidy and take just a few of the choicest morsels. And now, I think we'd better have a few geese. We'll take the biggest. And what about a couple of nice smoked hams? Fetch me that step-ladder, will you please?" Mr. Fox climbed up the ladder and handed down 3 magnificent hams. "And do you like bacon, Badger?"
"I'm mad about bacon," cried Badger. "Let's have a side of bacon. That big one up there."
"And carrots, Dad," said the smallest of the 3 small foxes. "We must take some of those carrots."
"Don't be a twerp," said Mr. Fox. "You know we never eat things like that."
"It's not for us, Dad. It's for the rabbits. They only eat vegetables."
"My goodness me, you're right," cried Mr. Fox. "What a thoughtful little fellow you are. Take 10 bunches of carrots." Soon all this lovely loot was lying in a neat heap upon the floor. The small foxes crouched close, their noses twitching, their eyes shining like stars. "And now," said Mr. Fox, "we shall have to borrow from our friend Bunce 2 of those useful push-carts over in the corner." He and Badger fetched the push-carts, and the ducks and geese and hams and bacon were loaded onto them. Quickly the push-carts were lowered through the hole in the floor. The animals slid down after them. Back in the tunnel, Mr. Fox again pulled the floorboards very carefully into place so that no one could see they had been moved. "My darlings," he said, pointing to 2 of the 3 small foxes, "take a cart each and run back as fast as you can to your mother. Give her my love and tell her we're having guests for dinner. The badgers, the moles, the rabbits and the weasels. Tell her it must be a truly great feast, and tell her the rest of us will be home as soon as we've done one more little job."
"Yes, Dad. Right away, Dad,"
they answered, and they grabbed a trolley each and went rushing off down the tunnel.